Yo, what is up everybody, it's the Great here, and welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we got quite an old video with the great Swagkage, but yet a very peculiar one. As you can tell by the title, this is Pain versus Sage Kabuto. Alright, so the reason I say this is peculiar is because amongst the Naruto fandom, this isn't a very talked about hypothetical matchup, at least to my knowledge and from my observations, right? And I think that's due to Sage Kabuto not being the most spoken about character amongst the Naruto fandom within the Naruto verse. And it makes sense because we didn't get to see much of him. You know, his most famous debut was against Itachi and Sasuke in the war arc when Itachi stopped the reanimation jutsu. So he's not very talked about in general. But looking at this matchup, we got Pain or Nagato versus Sage Kabuto. I believe Sage Kabuto is quite the formidable shinobi, right? He can fight blindly and is somewhat relative to Itachi, obviously in combat speed, but inferior, right? Itachi did catch him in the genjutsu that kept him in the infinite loop. And Pain, you know, took out a whole village on his own, was able to defeat Sage Naruto, technically speaking. He did defeat him until the Nine Tails emerged. And in the war arc, as an Edo, which is Nagato, he was swapping hands with KCM1 Naruto and actually was close to killing both him and Killer Bee at the same time and was about to rip out both of their souls until Itachi saved their asses. So both shinobi are very formidable. However, due to the linear scaling that I am currently processing, we basically have Itachi, right, over Pain due to the Edo altercation, right? Itachi was clearly superior in combat speed, was able to blitz him on more than one occasion. However, Sage Kabuto is inferior to Itachi. So we got Sage Kabuto and Pain in this somewhat ambiguous lead level. But I don't want to speak too long. Let's get straight to the video. I'm very interested to see what Swag has to say. But before we begin, any of us really appreciate it. Hit that like button, turn on bell notification to stay updated with yours truly. And if you're new and you enjoy, man, and you mess with the kid, make sure to hit that sub button once you become part of the family forever. But let's not waste more time screen. See what Swag has to say today.
How's it going, everyone? Swagkage here, and welcome to another Naruto video. Today we're going to be talking about something that somebody brought up to me on Twitter, and initially I wrote this off because I thought the answer to the question was pretty obvious, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, actually, that'd make a pretty good video, so here we are. It goes without saying that we're talking about Kabuto versus Pain. And of course, I don't mean base Kabuto from the beginning of Shippuden or from part 1.
This wouldn't be
I don't even think
discussion.
I need to get into that. And I guess as a bonus round, I'll also throw in a fight between Kabuto and Nagato. Not the Six Paths of Pain, but single body Nagato, the one that can use all of the powers of the Rinnegan at once. Now, even though I said the answer is obvious, this is a pretty tough fight to discuss because both fighters have such weird arsenals. Like, just as far as Naruto fighters go, Kabuto and Pain are both really unusual. And because of how situational many of their abilities are, this fight is going to be heavily affected by a lot of factors. The two most important ones are the location of the fight and the intel that both of them have going into the fight. Now, this could take place anywhere, so I'll get into location in a little bit, but in character, I think Kabuto knows a lot more about Pain than Nagato knows about Kabuto. See, when Kabuto takes control of Nagato during the fight against Itachi, Naruto, and Bee, he actually does a pretty competent job. It's clear that he knows, at least to some extent, what the Rinnegan is capable of. Now, he doesn't know everything off the top of his head. He actually says, what else can these eyes do? What other tricks does Nagato have up his sleeve? So it's not like he'd know everything he has to deal with, but I think he'd definitely know enough to give himself an advantage. The knowledge that Naruto had going into his fight with Pain was super helpful, and I think that it's one of the only reasons he came out of that fight alive. Obito even says the only reason he doesn't have any of the Jinchuriki use the powers of the Six Paths of Pain is just because Naruto, Kakashi, and Guy would all know how to deal with them by this point. So this is all to say that while Kabuto certainly wouldn't know everything that the Six Paths of Pain can do, he'd know enough to put himself in a pretty decent position when starting the fight. Of course, Nagato doesn't really know anything about Kabuto aside from maybe the fact that he's a medical ninja or something because he used to work as a double agent for Orochimaru and the Akatsuki at like the same time. But as far as his sage abilities are concerned and all of the body modifications he made, like I don't think Nagato would have any clue what he's getting himself into with any of that. Kabuto, without a doubt, has a massive upper hand in terms of intel. Like I said earlier, another variable worth considering is where the fight takes place, and this is because of Kabuto's ability to use Muki Tensei, or inorganic reanimation. This is a really stupid power that allows him to take control of the environment, and when he fought Sasuke and Itachi, he showed just how a oppressive this ability can be when fighting in somewhere enclosed like a cave. If this fight takes place in a similar location, the Paths of Pain are going to have a really hard time because of how much flexibility this jutsu allows the environment to give to Kabuto. Somewhere flat and mostly free of scenery like where Naruto fought Pain would give the Six Paths the biggest edge here, even more than I think fighting in the Rain Village would, given how much inorganic material there is for Kabuto to animate there. Now, even if we do give the terrain advantage to the Paths of Pain, it's not like this is a huge handicap for Kabuto. There are still many ways for him to manipulate the environment, and even if there weren't, it's not like that's the only skill he has up his sleeve. Still, while we're on the subject of changing one's surroundings, Kabuto can also use Kimimara's Kage Genkai to fill the area with bones, and if the ability functions as it originally did when it was in Kimimara's possession, then Kabuto should be able to travel through the created bones at will. In all honesty, I don't think there are a lot of places that would put Kabuto at a serious disadvantage. The only person with a stake in the fight's location is Pain, and it's not because there's anywhere the two could fight that'd make it easier for him, but rather it's for the sake of keeping Kabuto from getting an easy victory. In summary, both of these factors cause the fight to lean in Kabuto's favor quite a bit. He has the edge in intel, and he doesn't really care where the fight takes place. At best, it gives him complete control of the battlefield, and at worst, it doesn't really negatively affect him. That isn't to say that these two things alone are enough to give Kabuto certain victory, but rather that they make it a lot harder for Pain to deal with him. Now, before I say any more, let's dive into the abilities of both fighters, because I haven't been really done that yet, and it wouldn't be much of an analysis if I didn't talk about the bread and butter of, well, any fight, the fighters themselves. Now, normally in a video like this, I try to keep the analysis of both characters separate, but I don't think that's a very good idea here because of how heavily some of their skills interact with one another. So I'm going to be hopping back and forth between the two of them and more or less breaking them down at the same time. For starters, one thing they both have in common is they have very versatile skill sets. They each have a massive array of different powers and abilities, but where they differ is the Six Paths of Pain have their powers split among 6 different bodies, and this means that if just one of them is destroyed or injured, the versatility of the entire team is negatively affected. Now, the Six Paths technique does have inherent advantages that help offset this, with the two major ones being the massive field of vision shared by the Six Paths, and the increased mobility and strength intrinsically provided by simultaneously controlling 6 bodies at once. Now, in a normal fight, both of these things would help Pain out quite a bit, but Kabuto has one jutsu capable of eliminating both of these advantages at the same time, even if it is only temporarily. The Sage Art White Rage technique is a ninjutsu where the user fires a projectile dragon that explodes in a violent burst of light and sound. It was intense enough to immobilize and blind Sasuke and Itachi at the same time, so I imagine that it would be pretty effective against the Paths of Pain. You could try to argue that maybe the Rinnegan could see through the burst of light or something, but neither Sasuke nor Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan could, so I'm a bit hard-pressed to believe that Pain would be able to do it with no problem. Even if he could, he'd still have to deal with the brief paralysis induced by the jutsu, which of course would eliminate the mobility advantage that we were just talking about. Another thing worth taking into consideration is most of the Paths of Pain aren't very durable. Konohamaru nearly destroyed one with a single Rasengan, and Naruto destroyed the Asura Path with one punch. The Asura Path also seemed to be one of the most durable Paths of Pain, like it survived getting hit by a Chidori and all of these other attacks in the fight against Kakashi, Choza, and Choji. So with the strength boost provided by Sage Mode and all of the body modifications he's made to himself, I imagine that Kabuto wouldn't have a very hard time destroying most of the Paths of Pain with a couple of attacks. On the other hand, I don't know if the Paths of Pain have any ways of dealing serious damage to Kabuto. He's shown to be insanely durable, and he can also regenerate. On top of that, he's very agile thanks to the speed and reflex boost provided by Sage Mode, and his sensory buff should allow him to avoid a lot of the attacks that Pain sends his way. In other words, he's going to be able to dodge a lot of the attacks that Pain tries to hit him with, and whenever he actually does take damage, it won't be anything that seriously affects him. It either shouldn't really affect him in the first place, or it should be something that he can regenerate from. The Asura Path and the Animal Path are both very heavy hitters, but I don't think either of them would be able to do enough serious damage to Kabuto to kill him before he destroys both of them. And the only other Paths of Pain that could realistically do anything to him are the Human Path through Soul Absorption, and the Diva Path with Chaotic Shinra Tensei and Chibaku Tensei. Now these two might pose a bit of a problem for Kabuto, Chibaku Tensei more so than Shinra Tensei. The Human Path is kind of a non-issue because it's not built for combat, so we'll just focus on Chaotic Shinra Tensei and Chibaku Tensei. The problem with both of these is that Kabuto would be able to sense Nagato building up the chakra necessary to perform them. Before the Chaotic Shinra Tensei is launched, Kabuto could, after noticing a large amount of chakra being funneled into the Diva Path, set up a reverse summoning to take himself elsewhere temporarily, then come back and beat up the now powerless Diva Path, then he wins the fight. Chibaku Tensei is a little bit different. The thing about it is that the Diva Path has to get really close to Nagato's actual location. And as soon as Kabuto sees it leave the current location of the fight, I don't know if he'd choose to follow it. He also seemed familiar with Chibaku Tensei during Nagato's fight with Naruto, Bee, and Itachi, so I think he might recognize what's going on and opt to temporarily retreat. Even if he doesn't and he starts getting sucked into the gravity core, it's possible that he might be able to use inorganic reanimation to control the pieces of Earth clinging to the gravity core in order to free himself, or in order to send all of the pieces of the Earth after the Diva Path, or whatever. I mean, if he can't figure out a way to either avoid it or use inorganic reanimation to like reverse engineer it or something, then it'll definitely kill him. He'll be stuck in the center of this big old planetoid, and I mean, I can't imagine there's much he'd be able to do about it. And I also think if he takes a direct hit from Chaotic Shinra Tensei, I don't know if it'd kill him, but it'd do some pretty serious damage. I mean, I think that after getting hit by it, he'd easily be able to come back and wipe the Diva Path and any other remaining Paths of Pain out. I mean, if the Paths of Pain are anywhere nearby, they're probably going to get hit by it too, so they'll get wiped out, leaving the Diva Path as the only survivor, which again, it'll allow Kabuto to get an easy victory if he survives, which I think he will, even if it is just barely. Now, while Pain only really has 2 jutsu capable of dealing with Kabuto here, Kabuto has so many more tricks up his sleeve. He can immobilize the Pains with the White Rage jutsu and Kidomaru's webs. He can manipulate the terrain with Kimimaro's bones, inorganic reanimation, and even Jirobo's earth jutsu. He can catch all of the Paths of Pain in sound-based genjutsu with Taiyuya's powers, and it's been shown that the Paths of Pain are susceptible to this. Granted, the genjutsu performed by the Sage Toads might be on a much different level than Taiyuya's flute genjutsu, but neither Sasuke or Itachi were able to break it independently, and Itachi's like a genjutsu god, so I feel like the Paths of Pain wouldn't be able to break free of it either. Then there's the fact that he can liquefy his body to escape from any sticky situations, and the cherry on top is that with Sakon's Kekka he can even manifest an Orochimaru body, which supposedly allows him to steal the body of his opponent and add their abilities to his arsenal. I'm not sure how this would work with the Paths of Pain. I'm pretty sure all that would happen is he'd suck up the body and then he'd get the original powers of that body, so if he sucked up the Diva Path, he wouldn't get the Diva Path's powers, but he would get Yahiko's powers. I mean, it doesn't really matter because regardless, the Paths of Pain lose one of their fighters. This is all without mentioning Kabuto's ability to use Edo Tensei, by the way. I think, just for the sake of fairness, I'll restrict that for, like, all of the rounds, because if he did bring Edo Tensei with him, Pain would obviously get annihilated, but even without it, I think 9 times out of 10, Kabuto would take the win, just because he has so many ways of dealing with all of the Paths of Pain, and the Paths of Pain only really have a couple ways of dealing with him. Now for that bonus round I mentioned. Nagato is a completely different story. Like, at full power, given his performance against Bee, Naruto, and Itachi, Kabuto might have his hands full. It's a bit hard to say, because I don't know if he'd be able to absorb Sage Chakra any more effectively than the Preta Path initially could, but like, if he can absorb Sage Chakra without getting turned into a frog statue, then Kabuto's probably fucked. Like, Nagato will just absorb all of his projectile attacks, he'll figure out a way to immobilize him, and then he'll rip out his soul. He'd be able to do that much more effectively than I think the 6 Paths of Pain could. Just take a look at Nagato's fight against Biju, Naruto, Bee, and Itachi at the same time, but if he's not able to absorb nature energy, then maybe Kabuto will take it. I'm not too sure. The thing about single body Nagato is he doesn't have many of the weaknesses that the 6 Paths of Pain do, at least not the weaknesses that Kabuto would be able to exploit pretty easily, so I'm certain that he has a much better chance in this fight than the 6 Paths do. Anyway, that's gonna wrap up the video from me. Let me know what you thought about the battle in the comments.
This was an interesting one.
Make sure you have a great video, Swag. Thanks for watching the video all the way to the end, and until next time, talk to you later. Swagkage out. Bye.
Peace. That was a great video. I definitely wanted to listen and see what his take was, but let me give my own here. So, in my opinion, I think Swag didn't really assess Pain too much. He more so assessed Sage Kabuto. Obviously, his conclusion was that Sage Kabuto would most likely win. However, I think Swag underestimated what Pain could do, right? Pain's strategy would probably be very vital in defeating Sage Kabuto. If he goes in blindly, he'd have to assess the situation as the battle ensues, right? He'd have to figure out what this guy's capable of. He obviously wasn't familiar with Naruto's Sage mode, right? And he still defeated him. I don't think Naruto was on the level of Sage Kabuto, at least that version of Sage Naruto, which specifically I'm talking about the Pain arc Sage mode Naruto, right? This would be a tricky one It's a very, very tricky hypothetical matchup to try and assess. At in character, let's say Pain knows nothing of Sage Kabuto, and Sage Kabuto knows all about Nagato, all about, at least to some extent, the abilities of the Rinnegan, then, he would have the advantage in that department, right? But we also got to take into consideration reaction times as well. And the best assessment I can come up with from what we have seen and know is that Sage Kabuto seems to have superior reaction times because he did, obviously, much better against Itachi than Nagato did against Itachi. Nagato got blitzed by Itachi, right? On more than one occasion, he was instantly sealed. He could not react. So a lot of people like to use the argument that, well, Kabuto was controlling him. And from that, they're kind of implying that Kabuto was literally controlling his body and making it move himself. That's incorrect, because you would be implying that Kabuto was simultaneously controlling the bodies of hundreds of reanimated shinobi. That's not correct. What he does is he commands them. He gives them the commands and they do his bidding. He doesn't literally control them like you see a puppet shinobi control their puppets. It's not that hands-on. He literally commands them, right? He gives them a command, they do what he says. He doesn't make them do literally what he's doing. It's not a puppet thing. He just tells them what to do. He gives them the orders. Because how would he simultaneously be controlling hundreds of shinobi at once? Is he a puppet shinobi like Sasori? I don't think that's correct. So that argument I don't think is the best one to use when saying why Nagato was instantly blitzed by Itachi and why he was sealed pretty much instantly. It wasn't due to Kabuto literally controlling him like a puppet master would. That's not the way it works. The way it works is you reanimate him, you give him the commands, and they do your bidding, right? Like Orochimaru when he fought Hiruzen. He wasn't literally controlling them. He just reanimated them, gave them the order, and they did what he said, which was fight Hiruzen, Tobirama, and Hashirama. You don't move the strings and like move their body and stuff like that, and their reaction time is dependent on your reaction time. That's not correct. That's not correct. You just command them. So that was Nagato. And Nagato did very well. He was about to fucking kill KCM1, Naruto, and Killer Bee at the same time. He reacted to Killer Bee trying to save him, right? Instantaneously, he brought out another one of his arms. But as soon as Itachi came, he couldn't react in time. Itachi cut those arms off and was superior. Kishimoto pretty clear. The only contentious thing was the Chubaku Tensei, the question of could he have destroyed it. But I'm getting off topic here. So I would say Sage Kabuto has superior reaction times to Pain, to Nagato, right? And Nagato almost being in his prime at that point, because if you remember correctly, it was stated that you're virtually almost at full power when you're an Edo Tensei, at least the Edo Tensei that Kabuto formulated. That's what Tobirama stated. So you could imply there are anywhere from 80 to 90% around there. That's virtually full power, not completely full power, but virtually full power. So I tend to agree Sage Kabuto would most likely win due to how his performance against Itachi compared to Nagato's performance against Itachi, right? Although it's not a lot to go based off of, it's all we have. It's all we have. And there's no headcanon in saying Itachi blitzed Nagato. That's not headcanon. That's what happened. And Sage Kabuto against Itachi did fairly well. He did lose. He was inferior at the end of the day, right? Itachi had the superior reaction time and the intellect to get him in that genjutsu. So, yeah. So I tend to agree with Swag. It's a very tricky one. Based off my off-the-dome assessment from his words, Sage Kabuto would most likely win against Nagato or Pain, in my opinion. However, who knows? There's probably some people out there that can make some good cases for Pain. It's very ambiguous where these guys are as far as their levels and their capabilities. As far as arsenals, Sage Kabuto has a very, very, very good arsenal. He can liquefy. He can regenerate at a very, very high level, like entire limbs, right? He can fight blindly. He can control the environment, right? And the question is, which Swag brought up a good question, could he negate Chubaku Tensei with him controlling the environment? So if they were to both control the environment simultaneously, right, with Pain using Chubaku Tensei and Sage Kabuto trying to negate that gravity pull, could he do it? That's a great question, right? That's a very good question. We'll never know that. We'll never know who would win that. If he can do that, it'd be even more in favor for Sage Kabuto if he was able to successfully negate the gravity manipulation of the Chubaku Tensei. That's a question we can't really answer as well. There's really no answer to that because we've never seen it. We'll never know. We don't know the exact force that Pain's Chubaku Tensei has, or the exact force of Sage Kabuto's environment manipulation. That would be a big one because Chubaku Tensei is a very important tool for Pain, or Nagato, whatever you want to call it. If he's able to get Sage Kabuto into it, he's most likely dead, right? Maybe he could liquefy through the rocks or something and come back down to Earth, but even then, the gravity would just bring that liquid back up to the center. So he would probably die, right? If he's not able to negate the gravity pull or overpower the force of the Chubaku Tensei's gravity manipulation, right? So that's a great question. That would be a very important factor in determining who would win, but then again, we can't answer that question. There's no way to, right? But this is a great one. This is a very peculiar one and a very tough one to call, I would say. You know, it's a tough one to call because there is ambiguity ingrained in this one, but the best I could do, me personally, is compare Sage Kabuto's performance against Itachi with Pain's performance or Nagato's performance against Itachi. It's pretty clear who did better. It's pretty clear. You know, it's pretty clear who did better, which battle lasted longer, how they were defeated, right? It took more effort from Itachi to defeat Sage Kabuto. He had to formulate this battle strategy to get him in the Genjutsu, right? Well, on the other hand, Itachi just simply blitzed Nagato a couple of times and it was over, right? With the Chubaku Tensei aspect being the only contentious part on whether he could have destroyed it on his own or not. We'll never know that either, right? So, yeah, I guess I could say I agree with Swagkage on his assessment. When he brings in the arsenal, that's also another good point. He has a lot of abilities that are very, very useful in battle, right? However, there probably is some argument to be made on Pain, right? He has his own strategies, even on the fly, and who knows, maybe with the right strategy, he could defeat Sage Kabuto. You know, I think it's not impossible for him to win, definitely not. Especially if he's able to successfully use the Chubaku Tensei against Sage Kabuto. That'll probably be the game winner, so to speak. But yeah, guys, that's my thoughts on it. It's a very contentious one. I'm sure a lot of you are not going to agree with me either, or Swag. I'm sure of it. So please let me know of your opinions, whether you agree or not, if you're in the middle. Please let me know your thoughts. I'm always interested to hear, so leave it in the comments below. And as always, leave any recommendations you may have in the comments as well. But that's going to wrap it up, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the other way signing out. Peace.